There is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when your soul admits something it has been afraid to say out loud. A moment when you feel the heaviness inside you again, that familiar shadow that moves like a slow tide beneath your ribs. You have carried it for years. You tried to name it, tame it, run from it, outrun it. But it never left. It followed you like a soft echo, like a dim corner in the room of your inner world that you did not dare to enter. Tonight, we step into that corner, because the darkness inside you was never evil. It was never the enemy. It was something else entirely, something older, something wiser, something your spirit crafted long before you had the language to understand why. And before we travel deeper, pause for a moment within yourself and feel this truth rise. You were never afraid of the darkness. You were afraid of what it was protecting. If these words stir something inside you, write "I receive" in the comments. Sometimes the soul needs to speak before the mind can understand. There is a part of you that has always sensed this, in your quietest moments, in those late-night hours when the lights were off and the world fell silent, in the moments when you felt out of place, misunderstood, or strangely distant from your own life. There was a feeling inside you, not loud, not violent, not threatening, just present, still, holding. But every time you turned toward it, you turned away just as quickly. You told yourself it was too dark, too heavy, too unknown. You believed the discomfort meant danger. You believed the silence meant absence. You believed the coldness meant something was wrong with you. What you didn't see then is that this darkness was a shield, not a prison, not a curse. A shield made of everything your younger self could not say, could not express, could not carry in the open. A shield woven from the moments when life asked too much of you. And the only way your spirit could protect what mattered was to wrap it in shadow. This is the journey we walk now, not into the darkness, but through it. Because what lies behind it is the part of you that has waited the longest to be seen. And before we move further, let your spirit answer one quiet invitation. If this speaks to something hidden inside you, if it feels like a truth you've been circling without knowing how to touch, subscribe. This may be the confirmation you were meant to find today. There is a certain quiet that settles over you at the beginning of every hidden season. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock. It simply arrives, like a dim morning light slipping through half-closed curtains, touching everything with a pale softness that feels both comforting and unsettling. That was the season you stepped into without realizing it, a season where the weight inside you began to hum, low and steady, like a distant vibration under the surface of your life. You felt it in small ways at first, a heaviness in your chest that returned at the same time each night. A strange stillness in rooms that once felt familiar, the subtle sense that something inside you had gone quiet, not because it was gone, but because it was retreating deeper. You didn't know how to explain it. You only knew that something had shifted. Your soul remembers that shift. The world around you kept moving with its usual rhythm, but internally, nothing matched that pace anymore. You woke up feeling like your own footsteps were echoing too loudly in a space that had grown delicate. You spoke less. You felt more. And every feeling carried an edge you couldn't describe, a muted ache, like pressing your thumb against a bruise you didn't know you had. You tried to ignore it, to brush it away like dust on a wooden table. But it lingered. It followed you. It breathed with you. And then there was the room inside you, the one you rarely visited, the one with the unlit corner you never dared to look at for too long. It was always there, just beyond the soft glow of your awareness. You sensed it, not with fear, but with an instinct you couldn't name. You avoided it, because looking directly into it felt like opening a door you weren't prepared to walk through. This is where the wound lived, not loud, not chaotic, just present, quietly shaping the contour of your inner world. A wound isn't always a moment. Sometimes it is a slow erosion, a gradual wearing down of who you tried to be in order to survive things you didn't have the tools to understand. Over time, that erosion becomes normal, natural, invisible, but your spirit always remembers the texture of the first fracture. Sometimes it sounded like a sigh you released without meaning to. Sometimes it appeared as a numbness that wrapped itself around your thoughts like fog rolling in before dawn. Sometimes it was simply a feeling of being slightly out of sync with your own life, as though something in you had shifted 1 inch to the left and never returned to its original place. The wound was not failure. It was not weakness. It was the moment you stopped feeling safe inside your own openness. And when that happened, something inside you instinctively retreated. It stepped backward into that unlit corner, gathering whatever remained unprotected, shielding it with quiet shadows. You didn't know it then. You only felt the distance growing between who you were and who you pretended to be. Your breath changed. Your posture shifted. Your eyes began to hold stories you weren't ready to tell. This is what the world didn't see. They saw your strength. They saw your silence. They saw your endurance. But they didn't see the tremor in your hands when you sat alone at night. They didn't see the way your heart tightened when the room grew too still. They didn't see how your spirit curled itself inward, waiting for a moment when it could breathe without fear of being hurt again. There is a truth here that your soul has been trying to whisper for years. What you called darkness was often just the part of you that refused to disappear, even when everything around you suggested it should. Insight punchline. You weren't breaking. You were protecting what remained alive in you. There were days when you didn't understand why you felt so heavy, why every emotion seemed to echo inside you louder than it did for others, why small moments pierced deeper, why quiet spaces felt safer than crowded ones, why vulnerability felt like a risk your body wouldn't let you take. It wasn't fragility, it was memory. Your inner world remembered every moment when openness cost you too much, when trust stretched you thin, when softness left you exposed, when silence felt like abandonment instead of rest. And so, your spirit built a shield, not with malice, not with darkness for the sake of darkness, but with protection, woven from instinct, from longing, from the unspoken places of your heart. Insight punchline. Your darkness was the armor you didn't know you crafted, and often, the wound is simply the place where your spirit says, "This hurt me once. I cannot let it hurt me again." You didn't realize it as a child. You didn't have language for it as a teenager. You couldn't articulate it as an adult. You only knew that something inside you had grown cautious, measured, quiet. The world called it withdrawal, but you felt it as survival. Sometimes, in your quietest moments, you caught yourself glancing toward that unlit corner again. Not with fear, but with a strange curiosity, a sense that something lived there, something important, something unfinished, something that belonged to you. Insight punchline. What you avoided was never the darkness. It was the truth resting inside it. You didn't step toward it then, not yet, but even your avoidance was a sign of awakening, because part of you knew the time would come when you would have to walk into that corner and understand what it had been holding for you all this time. And so this phase ends not with clarity, but with the faintest turning of your inner gaze. Because something inside you is beginning to ask the question your mind has avoided. What if the shadow wasn't hiding a monster? What if it was guarding a memory? What if it was keeping a piece of you safe? What comes next will shift everything. There comes a season when sound becomes memory, when the world around you keeps speaking, but somehow, none of it reaches the place inside you that needs to hear it. You remember that season well. The days grew quieter, not because life softened, but because something in you withdrew its voice. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't visible. It didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in the way dusk slips over a city, dimming things slowly until you realize night has already taken its place. One moment you were moving through your life the way you always had, and the next, everything felt muted, as though the volume of existence had lowered without your permission. Your spirit entered the silence long before your mind understood it. There were mornings when you woke to a world that felt slightly out of focus. The colors were the same, the sounds familiar, but everything carried a softness that didn't match your inner landscape. You walked through rooms that felt a little emptier, even when people filled them. Conversations passed through you like echoes in a long hallway. Smiles felt distant. Laughter felt misplaced. Joy felt like something happening on the other side of a glass window. The silence wasn't the absence of noise. It was the absence of connection. You noticed it most during the still moments. Those late-night hours when the world drifted into sleep and you were left alone with the quiet hum inside your chest. The silence wrapped around you like a faded blanket, neither comforting nor threatening, simply there. This was the moment when the unlit corner of your inner room returned. It sat patiently where it always had, unchanged yet strangely heavier. You didn't step toward it. You only felt its presence, like a soft pull at the edge of your awareness. It wasn't calling you. It wasn't pushing you away. It was simply existing, waiting for the moment when you would be ready to understand it. Insight punchline. Silence often reveals the truths we spent years outrunning. You moved through your days with a strange tenderness, as though the air itself had grown fragile. The sound of your own footsteps felt louder. The walls around you seemed to listen. Even the sunlight felt hesitant, slipping through the window in thin, careful lines. Your emotions became echoes. Your thoughts became whispers. Your heartbeats carried stories too old to speak. There were moments when you felt the urge to reach outward, to find someone who could understand what you were feeling. But the words dissolved before they reached your lips. How do you explain a silence that is not empty but full of everything you've never said? You didn't feel abandoned. You felt suspended, held in a space between what you knew and what you had not yet discovered. The world kept moving, but your soul stood still, listening for something faint and ancient inside you. This was the silence before the unraveling. Sometimes you sat in a room filled with soft afternoon light and felt the quiet settle over your skin like dust. You listened for meaning in places where you once heard noise. You searched for comfort in routines that no longer grounded you. You waited for a voice, any voice that could speak into the hollow you felt growing in your chest. Insight punchline. When clarity hides, silence becomes the teacher. And yet, beneath all of this, something else was taking shape. A slow rearranging, a subtle restructuring, a quiet building of truth underneath the surface of your thoughts. You didn't see it happening, but the silence was not passive. It was purposeful. It was preparing you. There was a night when you sat alone, staring into a dimly lit room, and felt the unlit corner shift. Not in movement, but in meaning. It no longer felt like a place of avoidance. It felt like it contained something you had forgotten, something waiting, something real. This was your callback. The second whisper from the shadowed place that had been with you since the beginning. It did not threaten. It reminded. It carried the faint presence of something your soul had hidden away for safekeeping. You didn't step toward it. Not yet. But for the first time, you wondered what rested inside it. Your silence deepened after that, not as emptiness, but as awareness. You began noticing the way your breath slowed when you were still, the way your chest tightened when a thought brushed too close to truth, the way your spirit leaned inward, trying to understand what your mind kept avoiding. You weren't afraid of the quiet. You were afraid of what the quiet might reveal. Insight punchline. Silence is never empty when your spirit is speaking. There were days when the world felt far away, and nights when you felt closer to yourself than you had in years. This contradiction confused you, yet somehow grounded you. It was as if life had paused just long enough for you to hear the faintest whisper from your own depths. The truth is this: your silence wasn't abandonment. It was alignment, a recalibration of everything you thought you knew about yourself. And though you didn't realize it then, the silence was leading you somewhere. It was carrying you toward a moment when the unlit corner would no longer be a distant presence but a doorway, a place you would finally have to enter. Because silence always breaks, not abruptly, not violently, but with truth. and the truth that waited for you was heavier than the wound, deeper than the quiet, and closer than your own breath. What comes next is the moment everything you thought you understood begins to unravel. There is always a moment when the silence becomes too heavy to carry, a moment when something in you gives in, not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion. You felt that moment long before you admitted it to yourself. It arrived slowly, like a hairline fracture in a piece of glass, thin, invisible, but spreading with every heartbeat. You sensed it first in your breath, short, unsteady, caught between what you felt and what you were afraid to face. Then it showed in your choices, hesitations, pauses, small withdrawals from moments that once felt natural. Your spirit was trying to hold everything together, but the weight inside you had grown too dense, too concentrated, too old. Something had to break. And the breaking didn't come with noise. It came with truth. You were sitting in a quiet room the night it happened, the kind of room where the air barely moved. A faint light warmed the walls, and your hands rested against your knees as if trying to convince your body to stay steady. But inside, the storm began. Your chest tightened first, then your throat, not from fear, but from recognition. Something inside you was pushing upward, like a memory demanding to breathe again. You tried to swallow it back, tried to stay composed, tried to maintain the silence that had become your shield, but the silence cracked. Your eyes drifted toward the unlit corner, the familiar place that had followed you through every phase of your journey. This time it didn't feel distant. It didn't feel symbolic. It felt alive, like a doorway pulsing with something you needed to face. Insight punchline. Breaking is not destruction. Breaking is the moment truth refuses to stay buried. You felt the tension build, layer by layer, until the quietness you depended on could no longer hold what lived beneath it. And without meaning to, without planning it, without even understanding it fully, you whispered a question into the room. What is happening to me? The question wasn't a plea. It was a confession, a moment of surrender, a moment when the darkness inside you stepped forward just enough for you to see its outline. Then the revelation came. It didn't arrive like lightning. It arrived like a soft exhale you had been waiting your whole life to release. The darkness inside you was never evil. It was the shield your spirit built to protect the parts of you that were not ready to be touched. The moment you heard it, even if only inside yourself, something shattered. Not in pain, but in clarity. A truth you had spent years avoiding finally stepped into the light. All the heaviness, all the confusion, all the silence suddenly made sense. It wasn't a void. It wasn't a flaw. It wasn't a curse. It was protection. Insight punchline. What you called darkness was your spirit standing guard. You felt your shoulders loosen. You felt your breath deepen. You felt your chest warm with the realization that you had never been fighting against something inside you. You had been defended by it. This was the breaking, the collapse of your old belief. At that moment, the unlit corner changed again. For the third time, it shifted meaning. It no longer looked cold. It no longer looked distant. It looked like a place where your spirit once hid the parts of you that deserved safety. A sanctuary, not a shadow. Minute 15 callback complete. You felt tears press against your eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition that you had misunderstood yourself for far too long. You had been carrying shame for a shield your spirit created out of love. You placed your hand against your chest and felt your heartbeat. Steady, soft, conscious. You realized something essential. The breaking was not about falling apart. It was about falling inward. Insight punchline. You weren't losing yourself. You were meeting yourself. As the revelation settled into your body, a strange calm entered the room. The kind of calm that comes after a storm has told the truth it came to deliver. The air felt warmer. The light felt clearer. Even the silence seemed gentler, as though it understood you better now. You wiped your face, not to hide the emotion, but to acknowledge it. You felt alive again, raw, open, and closer to your own spirit than you had been in years. And right here, in this tenderness, the journey asks something of you. If your spirit is awakening through this moment, if these words feel like the mirror you've needed for too long, subscribe so you don't miss the next step. Because what comes after breaking is illumination. Your breathing steadied, and for the first time in a long while, you didn't look away from the unlit corner. You allowed your eyes to rest on it. You allowed your heart to approach it. You allowed your spirit to whisper the truth you had just uncovered. It wasn't hiding something from you. It was holding something for you. This shifted everything. Because once you understand that the darkness was a shield, you begin to see that whatever it protected must be extraordinary, something worth defending, something worth waiting for, something worth uncovering. The breaking is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of your understanding. And what you are about to discover will redraw the shape of your entire inner world. There is a moment in every inner journey when the truth no longer hides in shadow. It steps forward, slow and steady, as if it has been waiting for years beneath the surface of your silence. You entered that moment without realizing it. The room around you hadn't changed, yet somehow everything felt different. The air carried a quiet warmth. The light softened. Even your heartbeat began to echo with a gentler rhythm, as though preparing you for something long overdue. You looked around, trying to understand why the atmosphere felt charged with meaning. Nothing was obvious, yet every detail seemed to shimmer with a subtle invitation. Your eyes drifted once more to the unlit corner, the same place that had followed you from the wound to the silence to the breaking. But now, it held a new presence, a new language, a new truth. It didn't feel like a corner anymore. It felt like a threshold, insight punchline. Some revelations arrive not as answers, but as recognition. You took a breath, slow and deliberate, and allowed yourself to acknowledge the shift. For the first time, you weren't afraid of what you might find within that shadowed space. Instead, curiosity rose like dawn over your inner landscape. What was once heavy now felt meaningful. What once felt distant now felt near. Your spirit leaned toward the truth before your mind could name it. A soft memory surfaced, the earliest version of you who first learned to hide. That younger self who had felt too much, seen too deeply, been overwhelmed by a world that demanded a different shape than the one your soul naturally carried. That younger self had needed a refuge, a shelter, a shield. And suddenly, the shadow made sense. The revelation came gently, yet with the force of clarity. What you called darkness was the final layer of protection around your true self. The self you weren't allowed to be yet. The words unfolded within you like a door opening inward. Every ache, every silence, every moment of emotional retreat suddenly rewired itself into meaning. You saw yourself not as someone who hid, but someone who was kept safe until the world became large enough to hold you. Insight punchline. You weren't avoiding your truth. You were preserving it. A warmth spread across your chest. Not a physical heat, but a spiritual kind. A returning, a remembering, a restoring. You understood then that the parts of you that disappeared into shadow weren't lost. They were waiting. You closed your eyes for a moment, letting the revelation settle into your body. You felt it in your breath, in your heartbeat, in the way your shoulders gently dropped. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't fear. This was alignment. Your inner and outer worlds were finally meeting in the same place. When you opened your eyes, the unlit corner was no longer unlit. It seemed to hold a dim, amber glow, the kind that doesn't reveal everything at once but assures you that the light is returning. This was your minute 22 callback, the evolution of the symbol that had followed you from the first whisper of your journey. Insight punchline. The place you feared became the place you were meant to return to. You stepped closer inside yourself. Not physically, but emotionally. Spiritually, you leaned toward the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Every step dissolved a layer of misunderstanding. Every breath carried you deeper into recognition. The silence within you began to shift from emptiness to fullness. The heaviness transformed into meaning. The shadow revealed its original purpose. You began to realize that your true self, the one who felt deeply, knew quietly, saw clearly, had been protected, not suppressed. The shield had never been your enemy. It had been your guardian, holding the most fragile parts of your identity until they were strong enough to stand without armor. And as this understanding deepened, something inside you softened. You forgave yourself for the years you didn't understand. You forgave yourself for assuming you were broken. You forgave yourself for mistaking protection for punishment. Your spirit whispered a truth you had needed for years. You didn't lose yourself. You hid yourself so you could survive. There is a kind of beauty in that, a sacredness, a wisdom older than language. You began to feel the presence of the self you once abandoned, the self the darkness had guarded all this time. You let your inner world open a little wider. You imagined stepping into that once unlit corner, not to confront something, but to receive something, a memory, a truth, a version of you that never stopped believing in your becoming. This is the path of revelation, not light replacing darkness, but darkness revealing light. The quiet insight began to bloom inside you. The shield was never meant to be permanent. It was a bridge, not a boundary, a holding space, not a prison. And now that you were ready to see what lived beneath it, the revelation completed its descent. Your hidden self was never lost. It was simply waiting for the moment you would be strong enough to return to it. In that moment, you could feel your inner world shift. The room within you expanded. The air warmed. Something ancient inside you lifted its head for the first time in years. You had entered the reveal, and though you didn't know the full shape of what was coming next, you could feel its presence. You could sense the reconstruction forming beneath the surface. You were stepping into the stage where the past and the future would finally meet. Because what comes after revelation is rebuilding. Rebuilding never begins with a grand moment. It begins with a breath you didn't realize you were holding. A slow expansion in the chest. A quiet shift in the way your spirit stands inside you. After the revelation, the world didn't suddenly brighten, nor did your wounds suddenly close. Instead, something subtle happened. Your inner world widened enough for truth to breathe. You woke the next morning feeling different, though you couldn't explain why. The air touching your skin felt gentler. The light in the room seemed warmer. Even your thoughts moved with a slower, steadier rhythm. Nothing dramatic had changed, yet everything felt rearranged. Your spirit had begun to rebuild you from the inside out. Insight punchline. Transformation doesn't start with action. It starts with permission. You walked through familiar spaces, your kitchen, your hallway, the doorway you pass through every day, and noticed how your body carried itself differently. There was less tension in your shoulders, less bracing in your breath, less resistance in the way your feet touched the floor. You didn't realize it yet, but you were no longer moving through life in defense mode. Something in you had softened, and that softness was strength. Your mind attempted to make sense of the shift, but rebuilding doesn't speak the language of logic. It speaks the language of resonance, of return, of remembering who you were before the world taught you to hide. For the first time in years, you felt a quiet sense of safety rise within you, not because your circumstances changed, but because the shield inside you had finally explained itself. As you moved through your day, you began to notice moments that once triggered your instinct to retreat. An unexpected noise, a difficult conversation, a sudden emotion. But instead of collapsing inward, something held you steady. You didn't retreat. You didn't dim. You simply stayed present. Insight punchline. Growth is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to remain. Later that evening, you found yourself sitting alone again, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't restless. It was spacious, open, like a room being prepared for something new. You inhaled deeply, feeling your chest rise without resistance. This was rebuilding. the gentle unfolding of your inner landscape. You closed your eyes for a moment and imagined the unlit corner, the symbol that had followed you through every stage of your journey. When you pictured it now, it no longer appeared dark or distant. A soft glow filled it, revealing the outline of a space that felt safe, familiar, and deeply personal. This was your callback at 30+ minutes, the evolution of the corner that once held your fear now becoming the place where your truth stands without apology. The corner was no longer a hiding place. It was a homecoming place. You felt a warmth rise beneath your ribs, the kind that signals that alignment is taking root. You were beginning to inhabit yourself again, piece by piece, layer by layer. This rebuilding was quiet, but powerful. You started remembering pieces of yourself you hadn't touched in years. Your smile that once felt effortless, your curiosity that once felt endless, your creativity that once felt alive. You didn't rush them. You welcomed them. You let them approach you slowly, like friends returning after a long season apart. As these pieces surfaced, you noticed something else. The shield that once protected you wasn't disappearing. It was transforming. Insight punchline: your defenses don't vanish. They evolve into wisdom. You began to understand that the parts of you that hid were never weak, they were strategic. And now that the danger had passed, now that the truth had been revealed, those parts could finally step out into the open. This is where rebuilding deepens, not in adding something new, but in reclaiming what was always yours. You felt a shift in the way you spoke to yourself. Your inner voice softened. Your inner critic quieted. Your inner fear loosened its grip. You began offering yourself compassion instead of judgment, grace instead of pressure, patience instead of punishment. Slowly, the foundations inside you changed. You realized that you no longer needed to run from your inner world. You no longer needed to armor your emotions. You no longer needed to interpret your darkness as failure. Instead, you saw it as a map, one that had guided you here. Insight punchline: what once protected you now prepares you. As the day faded into evening, you walked to the window and watched the sky shift from gold to soft blue. The breeze carried a calmness that matched the rhythm of your breath. You weren't the same person who entered the silence. You weren't the same person who broke. You were becoming someone steadier, clearer, more whole. And though the transformation was not yet complete, you could feel its momentum. You were no longer surviving your story. You were shaping it. You returned to the inner room, the one that had followed you since the beginning. The corner glowed softly, inviting you to step into it fully. You approached it with a heart ready to understand, ready to integrate, ready to receive. This was the micro-revelation of this phase. What you thought you needed protection from was often the very thing that would heal you. Rebuilding is not loud. Rebuilding is not instant. Rebuilding is the slow miracle of becoming whole again. As you stood inside that inner room, inside the space that once held shadows, you realized something profound. You were ready. Ready to release what no longer served you. Ready to walk with what remained. Ready to become the person your shield always believed you could be. But the final transformation, the true emergence, the moment when everything in you aligns with the self you were always meant to embody, that part is still ahead, and what waits there will change everything. Becoming does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives with recognition, the soft realization that you are no longer who you were, and you will never be that version of yourself again. It happens quietly, like the first rays of dawn touching a long-shadowed room. It happens slowly, like roots breaking through the earth after a long winter. It happens within you before it ever becomes visible beyond you. You felt the beginning of it in the way your body moved with newfound steadiness, a groundedness, a fullness, a presence that did not exist in your earlier chapters. The fear that once lived beneath your ribs no longer dictated your steps. The silence that once echoed through your chest no longer felt empty. Even the unlit corner, the oldest symbol of your inner hiding, held a different glow now. For the first time, you stepped toward it not out of curiosity but with certainty. The corner welcomed you, not as a shadow but as a space of return. Insight punchline: You become when you finally step into the places you once avoided. Inside that corner, you felt something shift. A weight lifted. A veil dissolved. A memory surfaced. Not a painful one, but a pure one. The memory of a self who had never been touched by shame. A self who trusted instinctively. A self who lived without shrinking. You realized that this version of you had never disappeared. It had only been waiting for the moment when you would be strong enough to come back for it. This is the heart of becoming. Reclaiming the self that never stopped believing in you. The air in the room felt warmer as this truth settled. You felt your chest expand with a clarity that had no resistance. You felt your spirit rise, unburdened for the first time in years. What once felt like a fracture now felt like a foundation. Your transformation deepened with one undeniable truth. You weren't fighting the darkness. You were learning to become the person your shield always knew you could be. This was Revelation 3, the culmination of every step, every silence, every shadow you walked through. It connected the entire journey into a single, powerful realization. Your darkness was never your downfall. It was your guardian, your guide, your preparation, insight punchline. The version of you emerging now is the one your past was protecting. You stood taller inside yourself. There was no tremor in your hands now, no hesitation in your breath, no lingering fear around the inner room. You had stepped into the very space you most avoided and discovered that it held the truth of your strength. As you breathed into this awareness, something remarkable happened. The room within you expanded. The walls, once dim, filled with warm, golden light. The corner, once shadowed, radiated with a soft, steady glow. It was not the darkness that changed, but your relationship to it. You no longer saw it as threat. You saw it as origin. Insight punchline. You carried light into the place that once carried your fear. Your mind tried to grasp the magnitude of this shift, but becoming is not intellectual. It is experiential. It is embodied. It is felt. You sensed your identity rearranging itself from the inside out, aligning with a truth older and deeper than memory. You were returning to yourself. You moved through your inner house with renewed awareness. The silence welcomed you. The once hidden spaces opened to you. The shield that once guarded your most vulnerable layers now stood beside you as wisdom, no longer a barrier, but a guide. You understood yourself differently. You moved differently. You breathed differently. A clarity settled into your bones, the clarity of someone who has lived through their darkest seasons and found meaning within them. You saw your past not as a series of failures, but as a series of preparations. Everything that once felt like delay was actually protection. Everything that once felt like silence was actually guidance. Everything that once felt like breaking was actually opening. And as this realization deepened, you felt the emergence rise inside you, the undeniable sense that you are stepping into the version of yourself you were always meant to embody. This is the becoming, the moment your inner truth steps into the light without apology. You felt your spirit speak not in words but in assurance, an inner knowing, a presence, a strength that did not need validation. Everything inside you aligned with one simple understanding. You are no longer hiding. You are no longer afraid of your depth. You are no longer shrinking from your power. You are no longer misinterpreting your darkness. What once shielded you now stands behind you as support. And as the final wave of this transformation settled, your spirit whispered the truth you had been journeying toward from the very beginning. You are becoming who you were always meant to be. This is the moment when your steps shift from survival to intention, when your voice rises from whisper to steadiness, when your presence begins to carry the quiet authority of someone who has walked the valley and returned with wisdom. Becoming is not loud. Becoming is not forceful. Becoming is the calm after understanding. And as you stand in this moment, with your past integrated and your future opening, let this be the invitation your spirit receives. If this journey is awakening something inside you, if these truths feel like the path you were meant to walk, subscribe. Your next confirmation will find you here. The becoming is not the end, it is the threshold. And what stands beyond it is the life only your healed self can step into. There comes a moment, after every journey through shadow and silence, when you return to yourself with a kind of clarity you could not have earned any other way. You feel it first as a warmth beneath your ribs, a steadying of breath, a quiet confidence rising where doubt used to live. This is the settling of truth, the anchoring of everything you discovered along the way. You stand now in the inner room that once felt foreign, with the corner that once felt unapproachable glowing softly beside you. The symbol that followed you from the opening moments of your journey has completed its transformation. What began as a shadow has become a place of illumination. What once represented fear now represents memory, meaning, and return. The unlit corner is no longer unlit, because you are no longer hiding from yourself. Every revelation has woven into your being. The first, that your darkness was a shield. The second, that it guarded the truest version of you. And the final, that the shield always knew who you were becoming, even when you didn't. Insight punchline. You have not just healed, you have integrated. Look at how you stand now. There is no tremor in your spirit, no hesitation in your breath. You have walked through the wound, endured the silence, broken open, received truth, rebuilt your foundations, and emerged with an identity both softer and stronger. This is the beauty of becoming. You are no longer defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what awakened within you. As you breathe in this new awareness, you may notice something subtle. The room inside you feels larger now, as though the walls have expanded to make space for your becoming. Every part of your journey has a place here. The innocence you protected, the pain you endured, the silence you survived, and the strength you discovered. You carry all of it with grace. This is the moment to honor how far you've come, not with pride that shouts, but with gratitude that whispers through your bones. You are standing in the version of yourself your younger self prayed you would one day reach. Insight punchline. You are the answered prayer your past self never knew how to articulate. Your spirit now moves with a quiet authority, the authority of someone who has met their shadow and found truth inside it. You know your depth, you understand your softness, you trust your inner world in ways you never have before, and from this place of alignment, your next chapter begins. Before you step forward, let your voice join the space you've awakened. If this journey stirred something alive within you, write "I'm ready" in the comments. Your words mark the moment your transformation becomes your truth. You've walked through darkness, not to escape it, but to understand it. You've entered silence, not to be swallowed by it, but to hear what your spirit had been trying to say. You've broken open, not to fall apart, but to make room for revelation. You've rebuilt, not to return to who you were, but to become who you were meant to be. And now you stand at the threshold of the life that waits beyond healing. As this journey closes, feel the truth settle. You are not who you were. You are not who you feared becoming. You are who your spirit always knew you could be. Chosen one. If this message aligned with your truth, subscribe. Your next confirmation will meet you here. Your becoming has begun.